The radar operator's voice cuts through the pre-dawn silence. Contacts bearing 010, range 70 miles. Count is estimate 200-plus aircraft inbound. USS Laffey's Combat Information Center goes deadly quiet. Not because of fear, though every man knows what's coming, but because the number is impossible. 200 aircraft, all heading directly toward the radar picket line, all piloted by men who have no intention of returning. April 6, 1945, 16 miles off Okinawa. Operation Kikusui No. 1 is about to teach both sides a lesson in modern warfare. The 5-inch gun crews begin loading shells marked with cryptic VT designations. Each projectile contains something Japanese pilots have never encountered before, something their commanders don't even know exists. A miniaturized radio transmitter, 130 electronic components smaller than a milk bottle. Vacuum tubes designed to survive 20,000 times the force of gravity. The device that will revolutionize naval warfare and turn suicide attacks into mathematical equations. The Japanese pilots, approaching through the morning haze, are brave beyond measure. Many have less than 100 hours of flight time. They've written final letters, received ceremonial swords. Drunk farewell sake. They're flying obsolete aircraft, loaded with bombs, transformed into human-guided missiles. They believe their determination guarantees success. They're about to discover that electronic shells don't care about courage. The first wave appears at 6 o'clock. Through the humid air comes the drone of hundreds of engines, Zero fighters, Yokosuka dive bombers, even Oka rocket-powered suicide bombs carried beneath Betty bombers. The American guns open fire at 12,000 yards. What happens next will demonstrate why 15 million proximity fuses were manufactured for the Pacific Theater. Why Japanese kamikaze tactics achieving 34% success rates in the 40 Philippines will fail at Okinawa. Why shells costing $18 each will defeat pilots representing years of training and tons of irreplaceable aluminum. The VT-fused rounds climb toward their targets. Radio waves pulse outward. Doppler shift calculations occur in microseconds. Then, the sky begins exploding. Not where gunners aimed, not where calculations predicted, but exactly where aircraft are flying. The electronic fuse has arrived at Okinawa. The kamikaze will never be the same. The shells shouldn't work. That's what British scientists concluded in 1940 when they conceived the proximity fuse idea. Radio transmitters that could survive gun launch? Impossible. Vacuum tubes functioning after 20,000 times gravity acceleration cannot be done. Electronic components operating at 2,600 feet per second while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute, physically unattainable. American engineers at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory disagreed. Dr. Merle Tuve assembled a team in 1941 with a single mission: make artillery shells think for themselves. The concept was brilliantly simple. Put a tiny radio transmitter in the nose, have it send continuous signals. Measure the return frequency. When Doppler shift indicated proximity to a target, detonate automatically. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. The technical challenges were staggering. Standard vacuum tubes shattered under gun launch forces, solder joints failed, batteries cracked, electronic components designed for laboratory conditions couldn't survive 5-inch gun barrels. The shells reached maximum velocity in 37 milliseconds. Everything inside had to withstand forces that would turn human bodies to liquid. Sylvania Corporation began manufacturing special glass tubes with walls thick enough to survive, yet thin enough to function. The tubes were smaller than pencil erasers. Each had to be tested individually. Failure rate during development exceeded 90%. The battery system required complete reinvention. Normal batteries exploded under acceleration. The team developed an electrolyte that remained inert during storage, then activated from the force of firing. The acceleration itself became the power switch. The radio frequency had to be precisely calculated: too high, interference from ship radar; too low, insufficient detection range. The final design operated at 180 MHz, chosen after thousands of tests. By January 1943, prototypes were ready for combat testing. USS Helena, off Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran commanded the aft 5-inch battery. His crew loaded 3 shells, marked for test purposes only. A Japanese Naval dive bomber approached through clouds. Cochran's guns tracked the target. First round, conventional, missed by 200 feet. Second round, proximity fused. The shell passed 70 feet from the aircraft and detonated automatically. Fragments shredded the Val's wing. The bomber tumbled into the sea. Third round unnecessary. 3 years of development validated in one shot. The impossible had become operational. The proximity fuse worked because American engineers rejected conventional wisdom. They didn't ask whether miniaturizing radar into a shell was possible. They asked how to make it possible. They tested thousands of designs. They accepted 90% failure rates during development because the 10% that worked would revolutionize warfare. By April 1945, American factories produced 70,000 proximity fuses daily. Crosley Corporation alone manufactured over 5 million RCA. Eastman Kodak, General Electric, 87 different firms across 110 factories engaged in production. This massive industrial mobilization ensured that when Operation Kikusui began, American ships at Okinawa carried thousands of shells that could think. The Japanese, attacking with human-guided missiles, were about to encounter electronic-guided ammunition. The collision would redefine modern warfare. The Kamikaze program was born from catastrophic defeat. June 1944. The Philippine Sea. Japan lost 3 aircraft carriers and over 400 aircraft in what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Imperial Japanese Navy's experienced carrier pilots, the elite who had attacked Pearl Harbor, were gone, killed in combat, lost in accidents, or expended in futile battles against overwhelming American forces. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi faced an impossible situation. His first air fleet had aircraft, but no skilled pilots. Inexperienced pilots couldn't penetrate American fighter screens and anti-aircraft fire. Japan was losing the air war through simple attrition. Onishi proposed the unthinkable: transform pilots into guided weapons. October 1944. The Philippines. The first Shinpu Special Attack Unit formed. 24 pilots volunteered, or were volunteered, depending on who tells the story. Their mission was simple and absolute: load fighters with bombs, fly them into American ships, do not return. The first kamikaze attack hit escort carriers off Leyte. 6 aircraft penetrated American defenses. 5 found targets. The escort carrier Street Low sank. 3 others were damaged. 1 kamikaze pilot and 1 obsolete aircraft had achieved what dozens of conventional attacks could not. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. 5 hits from 6 aircraft, an 83% success rate. Compare this to the 2% achieved by conventional bombing. A single pilot could sink a destroyer, trading 1 life for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in warship. Japanese military leadership embraced the concept with desperate enthusiasm. Pilots. Young men. Many university students with draft deferments cancelled, reported to bases in Kyushu. Their training emphasized spiritual preparation over technical skill. Most had fewer than 100 hours flight time compared to 500 plus for Pearl Harbor veterans. They learned basic navigation, ship recognition, and most critically, the final diving approach. Instructors taught them to approach at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, then climb sharply before diving vertically onto targets. The ceremony surrounding kamikaze missions was elaborate. Pilots received rising sun headbands, ceremonial sake toasts, and sometimes samurai swords. They wrote final letters expressing honor at dying for the emperor. Some left fingernails and hair clippings for family shrines. The rituals transformed suicide into sacred duty. But beneath the ceremony lay pragmatic calculation. Japan's aircraft industry could still produce planes, though in decreasing numbers. Fuel existed, though reserves dwindled. Explosives remained plentiful. The only resource truly exhausted was skilled pilots. Making inexperienced flyers into guided missiles solved the training problem while potentially achieving strategic results. The Oka suicide weapon represented ultimate expression of this philosophy. A piloted bomb with 3 rocket motors and 1,200-kilogram warhead, nicknamed Baka, meaning fool, by American sailors. Maximum speed of 575 miles per hour in terminal dive made it theoretically unstoppable. Its fatal weakness was range, barely 10 miles. Betty bombers had to carry Okas directly into American defenses before release. The motherships were vulnerable and slow. The entire system depended on penetrating close enough to launch. By April 1945, Japan had trained thousands of kamikaze pilots. Aircraft of all types, from modern Zeros to obsolete biplanes, were modified for suicide missions. Operation Kikusui planned 10 massive coordinated attacks. Nearly 2,000 aircraft would strike American forces at Okinawa. The pilots believed their sacrifice would make invasion costs unbearable. That spiritual determination would overcome material disadvantage. That Americans, valuing individual life, would break under sustained suicide attacks. They didn't know about the proximity fuse. The genius of the proximity fuse lay in what it didn't require. No manual range estimation, no complex ballistic calculations, no fuse-setting crews frantically adjusting mechanical timers. The shell did everything itself. Here's how it worked. A miniature radio transmitter in the projectile's nose sent continuous radio pulses at 180 megahertz. When these pulses encountered a metallic object, an aircraft, they reflected back to a receiver occupying the same space as the transmitter. The return signal's frequency shifted according to the Doppler effect, exactly like a train whistle changing pitch as it passes. When that frequency shift indicated proximity of approximately 70 feet, an electronic trigger activated. The shell detonated automatically. The entire process occurred in microseconds, from detection to explosion, faster than human reaction time. The 70-foot lethal radius was carefully calculated. Conventional time-fused shells created fragment patterns deadly to 20 feet. The proximity fuse's earlier detonation spread fragments across a 70-foot sphere. This increased the kill zone by more than 12 times. A shell passing anywhere within that sphere would destroy or severely damage an aircraft. The psychological impact on gunners was transformative. Previously, anti-aircraft fire required complex predictor systems, calculate target speed, bearing, altitude, estimate future position, set mechanical fuses, fire. Hope calculations were correct. The entire process took trained crews precious seconds, and still, most shells missed. Simply aimed and fired. The shells handled everything else. Near misses became kills. Crews could engage targets immediately upon detection, rather than waiting for firing solutions. Multiple aircraft could be engaged simultaneously without resetting fuses between shots. The destruction mathematics were brutal. Time-fused 5-inch shells required an average of 1,162 rounds to destroy each aircraft. Proximity-fused shells reduced this to 310 rounds, nearly four-fold improvement in effectiveness. In optimal conditions, even more dramatic. The destroyer escort Abercrombie destroyed a Kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds in May 1945. But the Fuze's true genius was reliability. 130 electronic components had to function perfectly after surviving gun launch, then operate in temperatures from 100 degrees to -50. The vacuum tubes had to withstand forces that would crush human bone. After months of storage, the radio frequency had to remain stable while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute. American engineers solved these problems through systematic testing, thousands of shells fired, each failure analyzed, components redesigned, new materials developed, glass formulations that could withstand shock, solder that wouldn't crack under acceleration, batteries using electrolytes that remained inert until needed. By 1945, failure rates had dropped below 1%. The Fuses worked so reliably that crews trusted them absolutely. This psychological factor multiplied effectiveness. Gunners fired aggressively, knowing shells would detonate correctly. They engaged targets at ranges previously considered hopeless. The proximity fuse also proved effective against surface targets when shells passed close to water. The radio waves reflected off the sea surface, triggering detonation and creating lethal fragment patterns against low-flying aircraft. This eliminated the kamikaze tactic of approaching at wave-top height to avoid radar detection. Japanese pilots attempting their textbook approach, low and fast, flew directly into proximity-fused shells, detonating just above the waves. The electronic brain didn't care about altitude, it measured distance. Ocean or sky made no difference. The fuse cost $18 to manufacture by 1945. Each one contained the equivalent of a small radar set. This represented American industrial sophistication at its apex, mass-producing complex electronics with precision tolerances, reliability under extreme conditions, and costs low enough for expendable ammunition. The proximity fuse transformed anti-aircraft gunnery from art to science, from hope to certainty, from defensive desperation to confident dominance. The first proximity-fused shell that killed an aircraft wasn't supposed to be fired in combat. January 5, 1943, USS Helena cruised off Guadalcanal with 3 test rounds aboard, strictly controlled. Fire for data collection only. Recovery teams waited to analyze results. The shells were supposed to be experimental, not operational. Then, a Japanese Naval dive bomber appeared through clouds. Lieutenant Red Cochran commanded Helena's aft 5-inch battery. The Naval was diving toward the formation. Cochran's crew tracked the target with their first conventional shell loaded. They fired. The round missed by 200 feet, exploding harmlessly in the Naval's wake. The bomber continued its attack run. Cochran's crew loaded the second shell. This one had the VT marking, the experimental fuse. Cochran didn't hesitate. He fired. The shell climbed toward the Naval. Radio pulses transmitted. The bomber crossed within 70 feet of the projectile's path. The proximity fuse detected the Doppler shift and triggered instantly. The 5-inch shell exploded in a burst of fragments. The Naval's wing shredded. Control surfaces tore away. The bomber tumbled out of formation and crashed into the sea. Cochran's crew stood stunned. They hadn't hit the aircraft. The shell had detonated itself at precisely the right moment. The thing had worked. 3 years of development. Thousands of failed prototypes. Millions of dollars invested. All validated in one combat shot. The third experimental round remained unfired. Helena radioed the results to fleet headquarters. Within hours, production orders accelerated. Within months, proximity fuses began reaching the fleet in quantity. By mid-1943, they comprised 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By 1945, 75%. The reaction among fleet gunners was initially skeptical. Claims that shells could think seemed impossible. Early batches had higher failure rates. Some detonated prematurely, others failed to activate. Crews continued relying primarily on time-fused ammunition. Then came sustained combat at larger scale. The Solomon Islands Campaign. Rabaul. The Central Pacific Drive. Crews discovered that proximity-fused shells consistently destroyed more aircraft with fewer rounds. The statistics were undeniable. The near misses that previously meant nothing now meant kills. Psychological transformation followed. Gunners who had felt helpless against dive bombers gained confidence. They could engage targets immediately, multiple aircraft simultaneously, high altitude or low, fast or slow. The proximity fuse worked regardless. By Okinawa, American gun crews trusted VT ammunition absolutely. Commanders allocated 75% of magazines to proximity-fused rounds. Ships entering combat zones loaded VT shells first. Time-fused ammunition became backup for close-range emergencies. Japanese pilots noticed something was wrong during the Philippines campaign. Their attack reports described American anti-aircraft fire as unusually accurate. Shells seemed to explode exactly where aircraft flew. The bow, traditional evasive maneuvers, diving, climbing, jinking, had no effect. The black puffs of exploding shells appeared with uncanny precision. Japanese intelligence couldn't explain it. Captured American shells revealed nothing. The fuses looked like conventional designs. The secret of their electronic components remained hidden. Japanese reports described new-type anti-aircraft shells that somehow achieved impossibly accurate detonation. Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki, directing kamikaze operations from Kyushu, noted in his diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft reached their targets compared to 1 in 3 during the Philippines campaign. Something had changed. The Americans had deployed a weapon that Japanese tactical doctrine couldn't counter. Surviving kamikaze pilots, those who aborted missions or failed to find targets, reported terrifying experiences, approaching American task forces through solid walls of exploding shells. Defensive fire that seemed to track them precisely, detonations that appeared guided by invisible hands. The proximity fuse had transformed American anti-aircraft defense from desperate to dominant. The reaction on both sides reflected this revolution. American confidence, Japanese bewilderment. The mathematics were inescapable. Technology was defeating courage. Electronic intelligence was overcoming human sacrifice. The divine wind was failing against scientific innovation. The numbers told contradictory stories. Philippines campaign, October to December 1944. Kamikaze attacks achieved 34% hit rates. 1 in 3 suicide aircraft reached their targets. American casualties were horrific. Ships sunk or damaged. Thousands of sailors killed or wounded. The tactics seemed devastatingly effective. Then came Okinawa. April to June 1945. Kamikaze hit rates dropped 20%. 1 in 5 aircraft reaching targets. Some attacks achieved even lower success. The mathematical advantage that made suicide tactics viable was disappearing. What changed? One word: quantity. At the Philippines, proximity-fused ammunition comprised 25% of American anti-aircraft rounds. Time-fused shells, requiring complex calculations and precise range estimation, made up the remainder. Kamikaze pilots could exploit gaps in defensive fire, approach during reload cycles, dive when gunners were resetting fuses. At Okinawa, proximity fuses comprised 75% of ammunition. American magazines were loaded primarily with VT rounds. Ships could fire continuously without pausing for fuse adjustments. The electronic shells created overlapping kill zones that kamikaze aircraft had to penetrate. The contradiction was strategic, not tactical. Japanese military leadership believed that trading pilot lives for American ships remained cost-effective even at 20% success rates. One destroyer sunk for 5 kamikaze aircraft expended. One escort carrier damaged for 10 pilots lost. The brutal mathematics still favored suicide attacks, but the Americans kept building ships faster than Japan could sink them. American shipyards launched dozens of destroyers, hundreds of landing craft, and multiple aircraft carriers during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese aircraft production, devastated by bombing and resource shortages, couldn't replace kamikaze losses quickly enough. More fundamentally, the proximity fuse was improving, while kamikaze effectiveness declined. New Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses entered production with enhanced sensitivity. Detection ranges increased. Reliability improved. Failure rates dropped below 1%. By June 1945, American factories produced 70,000 proximity fuses daily. The industrial capacity was accelerating. Japanese kamikaze training quality, conversely, deteriorated. Early volunteers had been experienced pilots reassigned to suicide missions. By Okinawa, most were teenagers with minimal training. Some had never landed on carriers. Many couldn't navigate reliably. Their aircraft were increasingly obsolete, maintenance poor, fuel adulterated. The contradiction extended to tactical execution. Kamikaze doctrine assumed that approaching American ships through defensive fire was feasible, that pilots could select targets, adjust approaches, and complete attacks despite anti-aircraft opposition. This worked against time-fused shells where gaps existed in defensive coverage. Proximity-fused shells eliminated those gaps. They created continuous kill zones. Pilots couldn't time approaches to exploit reload cycles because reload cycles didn't matter. The shells functioned identically whether fired first or 50th in a magazine. Every round had its own electronic brain. American tactical innovation multiplied the contradiction. Ships developed the VT umbrella technique. Fire proximity-fused shells in predetermined patterns above friendly vessels under attack. The shells would detonate at set altitudes, creating protective domes of fragments. Kamikaze aircraft diving through these barriers faced walls of steel. Coordinated fire between ships created overlapping spheres of lethality. One ship's proximity-fused shells covered another ship's blind spots. The individual advantages of each VT round multiplied across entire task forces. Japanese responses proved inadequate. Pilots were instructed to approach at maximum altitude before diving vertically, hoping to minimize exposure. This made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could maneuver during the long dive. The high-altitude approach gave radar operators more tracking time. Other tactics proved equally futile. Night attacks reduced visibility, but radar-guided fire remained effective. Dawn and dusk attacks exploited sun angles, but didn't defeat proximity fuses. Multiple-axis simultaneous approaches overwhelmed some ships, but most survived. Japan had committed to human-guided missiles when America deployed electronic-guided ammunition. Spirit versus science, determination versus technology. The collision produced predictable results. April 6, 1945. 07:44 hours. USS Laffey's radar plot fills with contacts. The destroyer sits on Radar Picket Station Number 1, 16 miles northwest of Okinawa. Her mission is simple and terrible. Provide early warning of incoming kamikaze attacks. Draw fire, give the main fleet time to prepare. Survive if possible. 22 aircraft approach in the next 80 minutes. All kamikaze, all committed to destroying this single destroyer. Commander Frederick Beckton orders battle stations. 5-inch gun crews load proximity-fused shells. 40mm and 20mm crews check ammunition feeds. Damage control teams prepare. Everyone knows what's coming. The first kamikaze appears at wave-top height. Zero fighter, 500 pounds of explosives. Laffey's forward 5-inch mount tracks the target. The gun fires. The proximity-fused shell climbs, passes within detection range, and detonates. Fragments tear the Zero apart. First kill, first round. More aircraft approach from multiple directions. Laffey's guns engage everything simultaneously. No pausing to reset fuses. No complex calculations. Point, fire, let the shells do the thinking. The VT ammunition proves devastating. Aircraft falling into the sea miles from the ship, near misses becoming kills. The electronic fuses working exactly as designed, but 22 aircraft are too many for one destroyer. The mathematical reality is brutal. Even proximity-fused shells can't stop everything when attackers come from multiple directions simultaneously. Some kamikaze pilots get through. 27 hours. First hit. Destroying a 5-inch mount. Fires erupt. Damage control teams respond immediately. The ship continues fighting. 39 hours. Second hit. Another kamikaze crashes into the fantail. More fires, more casualties, still fighting. Over the next 40 minutes, 4 more kamikaze aircraft hit Laffey. Bombs detonate. Fires rage. The ship is dying. But her guns never stop firing proximity-fused shells. Even damaged mounts continue engaging targets. Crews bypass destroyed fire control systems and aim manually. By 09:47 hours, when the attacks finally cease, Laffey has fired 345 proximity-fused 5-inch rounds. Her guns destroyed 9 kamikaze aircraft outright before they could reach attack positions. Damaged several others badly enough that they crashed into the sea. The VT ammunition performed magnificently, but 6 kamikaze aircraft penetrated the defenses and struck home. Ship is barely afloat. Fires burn throughout the superstructure. Steering is destroyed. Power failing. Yet Laffey survives. This single engagement demonstrates both the proximity fuse's effectiveness and its limitations. The destroyer's guns destroyed more aircraft than they could have with conventional ammunition. The 9 confirmed kills at range prevented those aircraft from attacking. The VT shells worked exactly as specified, but no defensive system, regardless of sophistication, can stop everything. The proximity fuse made kamikaze attacks survivable, not preventable. It reduced hit rates from 1 in 3 to 1 in 4. It forced kamikaze pilots to approach through kill zones rather than just defensive fire. It gave American ships fighting chances they wouldn't have had otherwise. The investigation after Okinawa would confirm these findings. Operations research teams analyzed thousands of engagements. The statistics were definitive. Ships equipped with 75% proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks than those relying primarily on conventional ammunition. Laffey's survival, despite 10 hits and near misses, validated the entire proximity fuse program. Her guns kept firing. Her VT shells kept killing. The electronic ammunition gave her crew the tools to fight effectively, even when overwhelmed by numbers. Commander Beckton later testified that without proximity fuses, his ship would have been sunk in the first 10 minutes. The ability to engage targets immediately, without fuse setting delays, made continued defense possible even after damage. The investigation revealed the truth. Technology couldn't defeat human sacrifice entirely, but it could make that sacrifice statistically futile. Two competing theories emerged about kamikaze effectiveness during the Okinawa campaign. Japanese theory: spiritual determination guarantees success. The American obsession with individual life makes them vulnerable to suicide tactics. Sustained kamikaze attacks will break American morale. Force withdrawal: make invasion costs unbearable. The divine wind will prevail through pure will. American theory: technology preserves life while achieving victory. Superior defensive systems reduce casualties to acceptable levels. Production capacity replaces losses faster than enemies can inflict them. The proximity fuse transforms suicide attacks from strategic threats into tactical problems. Both theories were tested simultaneously at Okinawa. The results would validate one and destroy the other. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, believed absolutely in spiritual power overcoming material disadvantage. He wrote that American forces valued comfort and safety above duty, that sustained casualties would force them to negotiate rather than continue fighting, that Japanese willingness to sacrifice everything would ultimately triumph. Onishi's calculations were simple: 10,000 kamikaze aircraft attacking invasion fleets. Even with low success rates, hundreds of American ships sunk, tens of thousands of casualties, political pressure to end the war on terms favorable to Japan. The mathematics seemed sound if you accepted the premise that Americans would break. American Admiral Raymond Spruance held different views. He'd experienced kamikaze attacks personally. His flagship Indianapolis was hit in March. His next flagship, New Mexico, struck in May. He knew suicide tactics were effective, but he also knew American industrial capacity was unlimited and defensive technology was improving. Spruance wrote, "The suicide plane is a very effective weapon, which we must not underestimate. Yet the VT fuse has saved countless ships and lives. It is the margin between bearable and unbearable losses." His theory emphasized sustainability. America could absorb kamikaze damage indefinitely while improving defenses. Japan could not sustain kamikaze losses indefinitely while facing declining capabilities. The competing theories reflected fundamentally different worldviews. Japanese military culture valued sacrifice and spiritual strength. Death in battle was honorable. Individual lives mattered less than collective victory. The kamikaze represented these values in pure form. American military culture valued efficiency and technological solutions. Preserving life through superior equipment was moral and practical. Individual lives mattered because democratic societies demanded accounting for casualties. The proximity fuse represented these values in electronic form. The theories generated different predictions. Japanese planning for Operation Ketsugo, Homeland Defense, assumed that kamikaze attacks would sink or damage hundreds of American ships during the invasion, that casualties would be so severe that America would negotiate rather than continue, that spiritual determination would defeat material superiority. American planning for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan, assumed that proximity-fused defenses would limit kamikaze effectiveness to acceptable levels, that production of VT shells, reaching 100,000 daily by September 1945, would create impenetrable defensive barriers, that technological superiority would overcome fanatical resistance. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding amphibious forces at Okinawa, stated bluntly, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese kamikaze could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense. Turner's assessment reflected American faith in technology solving military problems. The proximity fuse wasn't just a weapon. It was validation of the entire American approach to warfare, scientific research, industrial production, and systematic application of technology to military challenges. Japanese Admiral Soemu Toyoda, chief of the Naval General Staff, reached opposite conclusions. His post-war testimony revealed that Japanese calculations for homeland defense assumed kamikaze success rates below 10% against proximity-fused defenses. At that rate, the tactic became militarily worthless. The theories collided over Okinawa's waters. Spirit versus science. Determination versus electronics. Human sacrifice versus technological efficiency. The outcome would determine not just the battle, but fundamental questions about modern warfare's nature. Surviving kamikaze pilots told strange stories. They described shells that exploded exactly where they flew, anti-aircraft fire that tracked them with impossible accuracy, black puffs appearing precisely in their flight paths regardless of evasive maneuvers, as if American gunners could see the future. Japanese intelligence officers interrogated returning pilots extensively. The descriptions were consistent. American shells detonated without direct hits. Defensive fire that seemed guided. Accuracy that defied ballistic limitations. Lieutenant Toshimitsu Imaizumi, who aborted his kamikaze mission due to mechanical failure, filed a detailed report. The enemy shells explode at our exact position. Not ahead, not behind. Exactly where we are. High altitude or low makes no difference. Speed and direction changes have no effect. It is as if invisible hands guide each shell to us. Japanese technical analysts couldn't explain it. Captured American shells revealed nothing unusual. The fuses appeared conventional, no visible special mechanisms, no evidence of revolutionary technology. Yet the combat results were undeniable. American anti-aircraft effectiveness had increased dramatically. The mystery deepened with captured documents from American ships. References to VT ammunition appeared frequently. Special handling procedures, priority allocation, but no explanation of what made VT shells different. The Americans guarded the secret carefully. German intelligence reports transmitted via submarine mentioned Allied influence fuses that somehow detected aircraft proximity. But German scientists couldn't replicate the technology. The vacuum tube miniaturization required was beyond German or Japanese capabilities. The deeper mystery was why Japanese scientists didn't deduce the answer. Radio proximity detection was theoretically understood. Japanese radar technology existed, though primitive compared to American systems. The concept of putting radar in a shell wasn't unimaginable, but the practical implementation seemed impossible. Vacuum tubes couldn't survive gun launch forces. Electronic components couldn't function while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute. Power sources couldn't remain stable under acceleration. The engineering challenges appeared insurmountable. This revealed a fundamental gap. American engineers asked how to make the impossible possible. Japanese engineers concluded impossible meant not worth attempting. The philosophical difference shaped technological development throughout the war. American proximity fuse development involved systematic problem-solving. Each technical challenge was isolated. Solutions were tested. Failures were analyzed. New approaches tried. The process was methodical, expensive, and time-consuming, but it produced working fuses. Japanese approach to technical problems emphasized perfection over practical solutions. Why build inferior technology when superior designs existed on paper. Why invest in developments that might fail? The result was fewer projects attempted, but higher rates of abandonment when difficulties emerged. The proximity fuse mystery also revealed security effectiveness, despite thousands of VT shells fired, despite some duds recovered by Japanese forces, despite extensive analysis, the secret remained secure. American operational security prevented technical details from being compromised. Japanese forces faced a weapon they couldn't understand, couldn't counter, and couldn't replicate. Vice Admiral Motomi Ugaki's diary entries from April and May 1945 show increasing frustration. He ordered tactical changes to counter the mysterious shells, high-altitude approaches, vertical dives, night attacks. Nothing worked. The American shells kept detonating with uncanny accuracy. By late May, Japanese intelligence estimated that American special ammunition was 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional shells. This matched the actual proximity fuse performance. They understood the effect without understanding the cause. The mystery tormented Japanese commanders. How do you counter a weapon you can't explain? How do you develop tactics against technology you don't understand? The Kamikaze program continued because no alternatives existed, but the mystification was complete. The proximity fuse's secret would not be fully revealed until after Japan's surrender. When Japanese technical teams finally examined intact VT fuses, their reaction was shock. The miniaturization, the robust design, the elegant simplicity. American engineers had achieved what Japanese scientists considered impossible. The mystery had been industrial capability all along. The proximity fuse wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement about American industrial capacity. 70,000 fuses manufactured daily by June 1945. 22 million produced during the war. $1 billion invested in 1940s currency. 15 billion in modern terms. This wasn't a military program. It was an industrial mobilization rivaling the Manhattan Project. 112 companies participated beyond main contractors. Crosley Corporation employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Sylvania produced millions of miniature vacuum tubes. RCA contributed radio frequency expertise. General Electric manufactured electronic components. Eastman Kodak supplied specialized glass. The entire American electronics industry collaborated. This production scale represented capabilities Japan couldn't approach. Japanese electronics manufacturing was artisanal compared to American mass production. Precision components built individually rather than on assembly lines. Each vacuum tube hand-tested, quality through craftsmanship rather than statistical process control. The implications cascaded through every level of warfare. Tactically, proximity fuses gave American ships decisive defensive advantages. Ships could defend themselves and each other. Task forces created overlapping protective zones. Kamikaze attacks, while dangerous, became survivable. Operationally, the proximity fuse enabled aggressive fleet operations. American task forces could approach enemy territories without fear of air attack, achieving catastrophic success rates. Carriers could launch strikes, knowing their escorts had superior anti-aircraft capabilities. Amphibious forces could land troops under protective umbrellas of VT-fused fire. Strategically, the proximity fuse invalidated Japanese defensive calculations. Operation Ketsugo, the Homeland Defense Plan, assumed kamikaze attacks would inflict unbearable casualties on invasion fleets. Japanese planners calculated that 10,000 suicide aircraft would sink hundreds of American ships. Force negotiations, prevent invasion. Proximity fuse defenses made these calculations obsolete. American estimates showed that even against 10,000 kamikaze aircraft, VT ammunition would limit losses to acceptable levels. Production of 100,000 fuses daily by September would create defensive capabilities that made suicide attacks militarily futile. The economic implications were staggering. Each proximity fuse cost $18 by 1945, down from $732 in 1942. Mass production efficiencies reduced costs 97%, while improving quality and reliability. This demonstrated American industrial learning curves operating at unprecedented scale. Japan couldn't match this economic model. Japanese precision manufacturing required skilled labor that couldn't be quickly replicated. American mass production used semi-skilled workers performing specialized tasks. This multiplication of capability through division of labor was industrialization's fundamental advantage. The technological implications extended beyond immediate military application. The proximity fuse required advances in miniaturization, rugged electronics, and automated manufacturing. These capabilities would later enable developments from transistors to integrated circuits to modern computing. The war accelerated technological evolution by decades. The psychological implications affected both sides profoundly. American forces gained confidence from superior equipment. Technology was defeating fanaticism. Science was overcoming desperation. This validated American cultural beliefs about progress, innovation, and practical problem-solving. Japanese forces confronted the opposite realization. Spirit couldn't overcome material disadvantage. Determination couldn't defeat electronic intelligence. The divine wind was failing against industrial capability. This shattered core beliefs about willpower triumphing over resources. The post-war implications shaped Cold War military doctrine. The proximity fuse established smart munitions as central to American strategy. Weapons that could think, that could adapt, that could overcome human limitations. This philosophy dominated military development through guided missiles, smart bombs, and eventually autonomous systems. The proximity fuse also demonstrated that industrial capacity determined military outcomes in modern warfare. Nations that could design, produce, and deploy superior technology held insurmountable advantages. This lesson influenced American defense strategy for generations, justifying massive investments in research, development, and manufacturing capability. Admiral Raymond Spruance summarized the implications simply: the VT fuse saved the fleet. Those 5 words captured the strategic reality. Without proximity-fused ammunition, American naval operations at Okinawa would have been untenable. With it, victory was achievable, costly but certain. Ensign Kiyoshi Ogawa sits in his Zero fighter at Kanoya Air Base, Kyushu. May 11, 1945. He's 23 years old, university-educated, drafted 6 months ago, given 3 months training. Assigned to a kamikaze unit. Tonight, he'll attack American carriers off Okinawa. He knows he won't return. His final letter reads, "Dear Mother, when you receive this, I will have gladly given my life for the Emperor. Please do not grieve. I die with honor. Yet, I confess, I fear the American defenses more than I feared during training. Pilots who have seen their shells seem to know where we fly. Many comrades do not reach their targets. I hope my sacrifice achieves something, though I am no longer certain it will. Your son, Kiyoshi." That night, Ogawa Zero approaches USS Bunker Hill. The carrier's guns open fire. Proximity-fused shells explode around him. He sees the black puffs appearing exactly in his path. The descriptions were accurate. The shells do seem to know. He dies when his Zero crashes into Bunker Hill's flight deck, along with 32 American sailors killed in the resulting fires and explosions. His sacrifice damages but doesn't sink the carrier. Another kamikaze strikes minutes later. Between them, they kill 396 Americans. But Bunker Hill survives because proximity-fused fire destroyed 3 other kamikaze aircraft that would have finished the crippled carrier. The VT ammunition saved hundreds of lives by preventing additional strikes. Lieutenant Robert Lundquist mans a 5-inch gun on USS Hugh W. Hadley. May 11th, the same day Ogawa dies. His gun crew fights for 52 minutes against continuous kamikaze attacks. They fire 114 proximity-fused rounds, claim 17 confirmed kills. Lundquist recalls, "We just kept shooting. The VT shells were amazing. You'd see aircraft 5,000 yards out, fire a few rounds, and they'd explode in the air. We knew our ammunition worked. That gave us confidence to keep fighting even when they kept coming." The humanity wasn't just statistics. It was young men on both sides fighting with different tools. Japanese pilots flying to certain death in obsolete aircraft. American sailors trusting electronic shells to save them. Both sides showing courage, but only one side having technology that matched their bravery. Seaman Eugene Brick served on USS Laffey during the 80-minute attack. 6 kamikaze hits, 4 bombs, 32 dead. He survived because proximity-fused ammunition destroyed 9 aircraft before they could attack. Decades later, I watched them explode around kamikaze planes, saw the aircraft fall. Without that ammunition, we'd have been hit 20 times instead of 6. We'd be dead. Commander Frederick Beckton, Laffey's captain, wrote in his after-action report, "The effectiveness of proximity-fused ammunition cannot be overstated. My ship survived an overwhelming attack primarily because our guns could destroy aircraft at ranges impossible with conventional ammunition. Every VT shell that functioned correctly represented saved American lives." The Japanese perspective reveals different humanity. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war, reflected on kamikaze tactics. "We sent young men to die in a hopeless cause. American technology made their sacrifice meaningless. They died bravely, but uselessly. That is the great tragedy." The letters kamikaze pilots wrote before their final missions reveal awareness of technological disparity. Many expressed doubt their attacks would succeed. They knew American defenses had improved, yet they flew anyway because duty demanded it, because refusing was impossible, because they'd been told their deaths would save Japan. The proximity fuse didn't just kill kamikaze pilots, it made their deaths statistically futile. That's the moral dimension often overlooked. Technology that prevented sacrifice from achieving its purpose. Electronics that turned human determination into wasted lives. American sailors who survived because of VT ammunition went home to families, had children, built post-war lives. Japanese pilots whose aircraft were destroyed by proximity fuses died miles from their targets, achieving nothing. Their families received only notification of death with honor. The humanity was in that difference. Technology preserving life on one side, fanaticism expending it on the other. The proximity fuse represented a philosophy that valued human life enough to invest billions protecting it. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner drafted his assessment in July 1945, 1 month after Okinawa secured. Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War, if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense. The numbers supported his conclusion completely. Okinawa Campaign, April through June 1945. 10 major Kikusui operations. 1,900 Japanese aircraft launched in organized kamikaze attacks. American naval forces destroyed hundreds before reaching targets. Those that got through sank 36 ships and damaged 368. Terrible casualties. 4,907 American sailors killed. The Navy's bloodiest battle. Yet the vast majority of ships attacked survived. The invasion succeeded. American forces secured the island despite sustained suicide attacks over 3 months. The revelation was mathematical. Proximity-fused ammunition transformed kamikaze attacks from potentially catastrophic to statistically manageable. The technology didn't prevent all damage, it prevented damage from becoming unbearable. Statistical analysis proved definitive. Ships equipped with 75% proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks. VT shells achieved kill rates 4 times higher than conventional ammunition. This multiplied across entire fleets to create decisive defensive advantage. More critically, proximity fuses prevented the loss of critical ships. Carriers were prime kamikaze targets. Despite hundreds of attacks, only 3 American carriers were sunk by kamikaze during the entire war, none at Okinawa. Proximity-fused defenses kept carriers operational even when damaged. Task forces maintained offensive capability throughout the campaign. The revelation extended to planned operations. Operation Downfall. The invasion of Japan, scheduled for November 1945. Intelligence estimated 10,000 aircraft reserved for kamikaze defense. American planners calculated acceptable losses based on proximity fuse performance at Okinawa. Production schedules showed 100,000 VT fuses daily. By September, the invasion fleet would carry over 1 million proximity-fused shells. This represented anti-aircraft capability unprecedented in military history. Japanese suicide attacks would face electronic defenses that invalidated their tactical advantages. Japanese assessments confirmed the revelation from the opposite perspective. Admiral Soimu Toyoda, chief of the Naval General Staff, testified after the war that Japanese calculations showed kamikaze success rates below 10% against proximity-fused defenses. At that rate, the tactic became militarily worthless. The cost in trained pilots, aircraft, and fuel exceeded achievable results. Vice Admiral Matomi Ugaki's diary entries through May and June show growing desperation. Each Kikusui operation achieved fewer hits. Casualties increased. American defenses improved. By late June, Ugaki acknowledged that kamikaze tactics were failing to achieve strategic objectives. The Divine Wind had encountered technology it couldn't overcome. The revelation was also moral. Technology defeated human sacrifice. Electronic intelligence overcame spiritual determination. The proximity fuse proved that in modern warfare, superior equipment mattered more than willingness to die. American investment of $1 billion in proximity fuse development seemed extravagant in 1940. By 1945, it appeared modest. The technology saved dozens of ships worth hundreds of millions, preserved thousands of lives beyond monetary value, enabled operations that would have been impossible otherwise. The revelation validated American military philosophy completely. Scientific research solves tactical problems. Industrial production creates strategic advantage. Technological superiority determines victory. These principles, tested at Okinawa, would define American defense doctrine for generations. Commander William Saunders, USS Aaron Ward, stated simply, "Without VT fuses, my ship wouldn't have survived the first 10 minutes of attack. With them, we fought for 52 minutes and stayed afloat. That's the difference between defeat and victory. The proximity fuse's revelation was complete. Electronic shells had defeated human-guided missiles. Technology had triumphed over fanaticism. The American investment in science had proven decisive. The divine wind had failed against the electronic mind. Okinawa demonstrated conclusively that modern warfare belonged to nations that could design, produce, and deploy superior technology. Japan's willingness to sacrifice everything couldn't overcome America's ability to build better weapons. Mathematical, undeniable, and absolute. The proximity fuse had changed warfare forever. The last proximity fuse was fired in anger somewhere over Japanese home islands in August 1945. By then, 22 million had been produced, 15 million for naval use in the Pacific, 7 million for other theaters and applications. The manufacturing effort had mobilized 112 companies across 110 factories, employed tens of thousands of workers, cost over $1 billion, every dollar justified by lives saved. The proximity fuse continued serving American forces through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Modern variants still protect warships today. The principle, a weapon that thinks for itself, revolutionized military technology. From guided missiles to smart bombs to autonomous systems, the proximity fuse established the paradigm. The Kamikaze program ended with Japan's surrender. Approximately 3,800 Japanese pilots died in organized suicide attacks. Thousands more in improvised missions. They sank 57 American ships and damaged hundreds more, killed nearly 5,000 American sailors. Their sacrifice achieved nothing strategically. American forces continued advancing. Production replaced losses. Technological defenses improved. The suicide attacks that seemed devastating in the Philippines became manageable at Okinawa. The trend was irreversible. Japanese pilots interviewed decades later expressed bitter awareness. Their deaths had been futile. American technology had defeated their determination. The divine wind had failed because it was wind meeting electronics, spirit meeting science, courage meeting mathematics. The contrast tells everything about modern warfare. America invested billions developing shells that could think. Japan invested lives transforming pilots into weapons. One approach preserved life through technology. The other expended life as technology. The results were never in doubt. Dr. Merle Tuver, who led proximity fuse development, reflected simply, "We saved lives by making weapons more effective." Every kamikaze shot down by a VT fuse meant American sailors who went home to their families. That was worth any effort. His team's achievement validated the American approach completely. Scientific research applied to military problems, industrial production creating strategic advantage, technological superiority determining victory. These principles shaped American defense strategy throughout the Cold War and beyond. For Japan, the kamikaze's failure against proximity fuse defenses marked the end of beliefs about spiritual superiority overcoming material disadvantage. Modern Japan's emphasis on technological development traces partly to harsh lessons learned when electronic fuses defeated human pilots with mechanical precision. The human cost differential was absolute. American families received their sons and husbands home because proximity fuses worked. Japanese families received only notification that their sons died with honor, achieving nothing measurable. The legacy extends beyond military history. The proximity fuse established American technological dominance that defined the post-war era. The collaboration between universities, industry, and military that created VT fuses became the model for subsequent achievements. From satellites to computers to modern electronics, the organizational patterns began with Section T at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. The mathematical precision was inescapable, 310 rounds per kill versus 1,162. Each proximity fuse that functioned correctly was a kamikaze aircraft that didn't reach its target, a ship that survived. Sailors who came home, Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal's words remain definitive. To Japan. Without this ingenious device, our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost would have been immeasurably greater. The story ends with a truth about modern warfare. Technology matters more than courage. Industrial capacity determines outcomes. Electronic intelligence defeats human sacrifice. The proximity fuse proved these principles absolutely at Okinawa. 36 American ships sunk. 1,900 Japanese aircraft expended. The proximity fuse made that exchange survivable for America, catastrophic for Japan. Electronic shells defeated divine wind. Science triumphed over spirit. The modern age had arrived in the skies over Okinawa, announced by the distinctive crack of proximity-fused shells detonating exactly where they needed to.